Hello, welcome to me reading The Princess and the Goblins by George MacDonald. Let's start at the beginning with Chapter 1. Why the Princess has a story about her. There was once a little princess whose father was king over a great country filled with mountains and valleys. His palace was built upon one of the mountains, and it was very grand and beautiful. The princess, whose name was Irene, was born there. But she was soon sent after her birth, because her mother was not very strong, to be brought up by country people in a large house, half castle, half farmhouse, on the other side of the mountain, about halfway between the base and its peak. The princess was a sweet little creature, and at the time my story begins, she was about 8 years old, I think. But she got older very fast. Her face was fair and pretty, with eyes like two bits of the night sky, each with stars dissolved into the blue. Those eyes, you would have thought, must have known they came from there. So often were they turned up in that direction. The ceiling of her nursery was blue, with stars in it, as like the sky as it could be made. But I doubt if she ever saw the real sky with stars in it, for reasons which I'd better mention at once. These mountains were full of hollow places underneath, huge caverns and winding ways, some with water running through them, and some shining all the colours of the rainbow where the light was taken in. There would not have been much known about them had there not been mines there, great deep pits with long galleries and passages running off them, which had been dug to get the ore which was in the mountain. In the course of digging, the miners came upon many of these natural caves. A few of them had further up openings out onto the side of the mountain or into the ravines. Now, in these subterranean caves lived a strange race of beings, called by some gnomes, by some kobolds, by some goblins. There was a legend current in the country that at one time they lived above the ground and were very much like people, but for some reason or other, concerning which there were different legendary theories, the king had laid what they thought too severe a tax upon them, or had required observances from them that they did not like, or had begun to treat them with more severity in some way or another, and imposed stricter laws, and the consequence was that they had begun to disappear from the face of the country. According to the legend, however, instead of going to some other country, they had all taken refuge in the subterranean caverns, whence they never came out, but at night, and then seldom showed themselves in any number, and never to many people at once. It was only in the least frequented and most difficult parts of the mountain where they were said to gather at night in the open air. Those who caught sight of any of them said that they were greatly altered over the course of generations, and no wonder, seeing as they lived away from the sun, in the cold and the wet and the dark places. They were now not ordinarily ugly, but either absolutely hideous or ludicrously grotesque, both in face and form. There was no invention, they said, of the most lawless imagination expressed by pen or pencil that could surpass the extravagantness of their appearance. But I suppose those who said this may have mistaken some of their animal companions for goblins themselves, of which more by and by. The goblins themselves were not more far removed from the human race than this description would imply, and as they grew misshapen in body, they had grown in knowledge and in cleverness, and now were able to do things no mortal could see the possibility of. But as they grew in cunning, they grew in mischief, and their great delight was in every way they could think of to annoy the people living in the open air story above them. They had enough affection left for each other to preserve them from making absolute cruelty for cruelty's sake to those who came their way, but still they so heartily cherished the ancestral grudge against those who occupied their former position, and especially against the descendants of the king who caused their expulsion, that they sought out every opportunity of tormenting them in ways that were as odd as their inventions. And although dwarfed and misshapen, their strength was equal to their cunning. In the progress of times, they got a king and a government of their own, whose chief business, beyond their own simple affairs, was to devise trouble for their neighbours. It will now be pretty evident why the little princess had never seen the sky at night. They were much too afraid of the goblins to let her out of the house then, even in the company of so very many attendants. And they had good reason, as we will see by and by.